Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Fantasy Football Universe. I am your host, Aaron St. Dennis. Follow me everywhere at FF Mad Scientist. I am here today for the first waiver wire show of the season, and I guess I'm doing it solo. Week 2 waiver wire targets, and it's just me. So strap in. We'll take a look here at all the positions. I have it broken down. If you want to check out my waiver wire article, it released at 10 a.m. this morning. Go over to fantasyfootballuniverse.com. I break it down into the 4 positions: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and then it is divided by ownership range, 0 to 25%, 26 to 50%, and then those players that are rostered in more than 50% of leagues. And even, having said that, I'm sure I will get the inevitable comment of these guys aren't available in my league. So if that's your comment, please don't bother commenting it in the chat. We know everybody plays in the deepest league on earth, and there's just nobody available. But for those of you who have some players available, I guess we'll take a look at the quarterbacks first. I'll run through my players, and then I'll kind of recap and break them down each once I've gone through all of them. At quarterback, I've got the lowest tier here: Malik Willis, 0% rostered. Sam Darnold of the Vikings, 10%. Malik Willis was on the Packers. Justin Fields of the Steelers, 14%. Baker Mayfield of the Bucks, 34%. Geno Smith of the Seahawks, 32%. Derek Carr of the Saints, 30%. Followed up by Justin Herbert of the Chargers at 66%. 68% for the Rams, Matthew Stafford, and 74% for Brock Purdy of the Niners. Obviously, in the majority of the leagues I've seen, the one everyone's going for here is Malik Willis. Because in Superflex leagues, he's pretty much the only quarterback available on the board. Don't necessarily love it. I think the Green Bay offense is pretty solid. I don't want any piece of anything in that offense with the exception of Aaron Jones, Josh Jacobs, until Jordan Love returns. I think Malik Willis, I don't know, could be okay, but I don't see more than maybe a 10 to 12 point potential here. I'm looking back at his stats in 3 years. His best output is 12.26 fantasy points as a rookie. He averages about 4 points. He's got a lot more 0 and 1s than he has anything over 5. So I get that the Packers are desperate. I get that you may be desperate, but unless you are absolutely, really, really, really desperate, I'm not looking to start Malik Willis. He's still not on my radar, obviously, in single QB. A few that are interesting here. I see on Sleeper, the third highest added quarterback is Jaden Daniels. Obviously, he's one where you just add him everywhere he's available. He looked the best out of the rookie quarterback with the rushing upside. He's 85% rostered, so I don't mention him. I don't typically go in my article anything over 75%, but he's on Sleeper at 85%. If you can, go for it. Justin Fields, as I mentioned, he's an interesting one. Who knows if he's even the starter, in week 2. We don't know the long-term status here of Russell Wilson. Could be back next week. Could be done for the season. No idea. Justin Fields was decent. He wasn't anything special. He has some upside here with the rushing, but as we seen last week, his previous rushing upside was 80 to 100 yards. He only put up 57. So when he doesn't rush for 100 yards or a couple of rushing touchdowns, he's useless. He put up 11.9 fantasy points, 156 yards passing. That's going to be the norm for passing. So basically, if you're starting Fields, you have to hope he hits 100 rushing yards. He didn't in week 1, and he was essentially useless. I'm not using a ton of fab budget on him. I'm not using a ton of fab budget on Willis either. But in Fields' case, there's more upside, but you don't know how long he's going to be the starting quarterback for. I guess I advocate for spending more if you have Russ and you want to handcuff him, but I don't really want to spend money on, any of these lower tier quarterbacks. Sam Darnold, he's going to be the starter for the Vikings. He was the last one in my bottom tier here. 10% rostered. He's another one where if I'm in super flex and I'm desperate, you got to do what you got to do. Like, I'm sure in a thing like Scott Fishbowl, actually not Fishbowl for me. There is a league where my starting quarterback was JJ McCarthy. I don't have another QB on my roster besides my starter. I think it's Richardson. So I have no QB2, and I had to play a tight end last week because I have Mark Andrews and Trey McBride. Didn't work out too well for me. I'm probably going to spend more in that league to acquire Sam Darnold because I am the McCarthy owner and because there's nothing. So that's the only league where I'm going to put in a 10% or higher bid on Darnold, Willis, players of that nature. And it's simply because I have no other option. And if I don't get either of them, I'm going to be starting position players. With Willis, I'm paying even less for him than Darnold because I think position players in the long term may outproduce him in my super flex spot. Whereas at least with Darnold, I'm going to click on him here. What did he put up last week? Almost 20 points. So he was usable. Still a turnover. Still not great. But he is usable as my QB2 in a pinch, which is what I'm in. Malik Willis, I think I prefer starting a position player. I know that sounds terrible, but that's where we are. As I said, the middle tier here, this is kind of a case of these are all must starts if you're in a super flex league in Baker, Geno, and Derek Carr. Oh, I just called Derek Carr a must start. That's kind of scary. But that's where we are in super flex. If you're in a single QB league, that's where it gets interesting. I'm not really rostering Carr. I think the Panthers might just be that bad. So I guess if it's a deep league and you want to stash him as a QB2 for a bye week, go for it. I'm not wasting much money on him. Geno, I think, is serviceable. I carry a lot of backup, like a QB2 in a lot of my one QB leagues. I just like to operate that way unless I really have someone on the waiver wire I love. Geno's solid as a backup. Baker, I think, is the only one here where you're adding him with the intention of maybe using him as your starter. If you drafted a Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert, Caleb Williams, Bo Nix, something like that, and they're struggling, add Baker. Baker can probably start for you. In the end, he may be your season-long starter. Who knows? Even Joe Burrow. You put Baker in here until he's till Burrow or whoever these quarterbacks are until they get their game back on track. And maybe Baker just repeats what he did last year and he's your starter all year. Again, most of these guys are only single QB options. They're heavily rostered. They're universally rostered, I believe, in Superflex. And in a single QB, I'm probably not willing to spend more than $5 on any of them. Baker would be the top, but single QB, just don't waste your money on a backup quarterback. It's a luxury. I do it myself. I do carry them as a luxury, but the ones I do, it's a last round draft pick. It's a free guy off the waiver wire for a couple of bucks. The highest owned tier here is Herbert. These are pretty much guys that are only available in single QB, and even Brock Purdy. So it's Herbert, Stafford, Purdy. Purdy's pretty much universally rostered. Somehow, despite the fact that even in my one QB leagues, Purdy was drafted as a top 10 or 12 quarterback, he still sits at only 74% rostered, which I find puzzling. So if Purdy's available, I think he's the one I'm spending the most on because he's probably going to be a week in, week out starter for you. He was okay in week one. I didn't see his final stat line. I don't have him up here. I know it wasn't terrible. I know it wasn't, awesome. I'm going to look it up quickly here. He faced the Jets. They might be, okay, so it was pretty bad. 231 yards, only 10 fantasy points, no rushing yards, no touchdowns. But again, Jets defense might be one of the best units in the league, so let's not hold that against them. Stafford, Herbert. I think Herbert's a great buy low. If you have someone else at quarterback, like if you had Baker, pick up Herbert here, and he could potentially end up being a top 5 or 6 quarterback. If not, you still have someone safe. And Stafford is your the definition of a safe, boring quarterback. He looked great on Monday night there with Cooper Kupp at his 21 targets. So that was nice to see. I see he's the second most added player on Sleeper. 60% rostership. Still, despite the great game for Cooper Kupp and 317 yards, only one passing touchdown, so he put up 18 fantasy points. Stafford is probably, he's going to be a mid to high end QB2. He's going to be your backup in most single QB leagues. Most of these quarterbacks we're only talking about in single QB because, they're not available in Superflex outside of the first tier we discussed. So overall, I'm looking over these guys. Obviously, like I said, if you can get Purdy, you can get Baker. That's where you start. I'm assuming they're not available in most. I don't really want to chase the Derek Carr repeat. For me, if you want to, I don't really like any of these guys. It's not great. The early tier here of Willis, Darnold, Fields are all risky. Darnold's is the guy I'm going to have the most of because he's the one available with the best upside in the scenarios I'm in with the leagues I need a second quarterback. Overall, Baker's probably the guy you want to target here. Like I said, Purdy, but Purdy's probably not available in too many of your leagues. We got a comment. Make sense of this trade. Is that Anthony Richardson and Ford and McBride for Hall, Allen, Justice Hill? The Hall owner needed a QB, but I don't know about giving McBride. So I'm assuming this is in single QB. So it's Richardson, Ford, and McBride. Can you rewrite out that trade here quickly? It's kind of tough to decipher here. What I'm looking at is Richardson, Ford, and McBride for Hall, Allen, and Justice Hill. I don't really understand what's going on there. Do me a favor, explain that one a little bit better for me, and I'll answer your question. But for now, I'm going to go on to running back. So the bottom tier here we have 4% rostered is Alexander Mattison of the Raiders. Justice Hill, who I think was in that trade just mentioned, he is 6% on the Ravens. Bucky Irving of the Buccaneers, 21%. Mattison came in and was pretty much the passing downs guy completely for the Raiders. Split some rushing work, and it looks like it's not the Zamir White show. This all depends, I guess, how much you need. Need a running back. I know you want to spend all your money on the league winning, your fab budget on the league winning running backs. I don't necessarily think it's in this group. Madison, I think, is going to be a decent flex option. So if you're desperate, he's worth a few bucks here. Justice Hill had concerning usage there. He was the third downs back for Baltimore. He did take a little on the ground away from Henry, but it was also very game scripted dependent, where I think when the Ravens are underdogs, you're going to see less of a role for Henry. When they're favorites, they're going to just run him into the ground. So I don't necessarily know if Hill can be relied on here. Bucky Irving took a fair amount of the groundwork from Rachaad White. Didn't touch any of the passing work for the most part. The concerning part here is when they split the carries 50-50, Irving was like 3 times more effective with the touches. So that scares me that maybe Irving is going to be the rushing downs back and Rachaad White is only going to be the pass catcher. Having said that, I see some upside here, but there's another, high-end back in this backfield. So I don't really want to contribute all that much into Chase Irving. None of these guys here for me are worth more than $5 or $6. I would say Madison probably the most if you're desperate. The next group is interesting. 26 to 50% owned. We've got J.K. Dobbins of the Chargers at 49%, Zach Charbonnet of the Seahawks at 47%, and Jordan Mason of the 49ers at 37%. And I wrote in this article that by the time it published this morning, he's probably up at 95%. Let's check in and see what that ownership is now. He's still only at 57% rostered. So he's probably going to be the guy to add, especially considering he absolutely went off last night. If you have him, or if you have him on your waiver wire, I'm not dropping the bag. Like, I get it. He was awesome last night. If CMC is announced to be missing the season, drop every cent you have on him. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think CMC is back sooner than later. I'd still like to add Mason. Charbonnet, I will be dropping off this list. It turned out that Ken Walker is indeed healthy, so that's not something to concern yourself with. He's still an elite handcuff. He still has a little standalone value, but he's not the one I'm chasing. Somehow in this Chargers backfield, J.K. Dobbins is going to be the one I'm going to chase. He came out, looked absolutely awesome. Gus Edwards looked washed. Kamani Vidal, was he a healthy scratch? Did he not touch the ball? I don't remember, but J.K. Dobbins looks to be the one with long-term viability here. He will be my highest fab allocation, I believe, at any position this week. That's my prize there. I'd rather have J.K. Dobbins, who I think is going to be in this role with the Chargers, even though it's a worse offense for the rest of the season, as opposed to Jordan Mason, who could only be 1 or 2 weeks here. And we have to kind of assume here that Jordan Mason probably has his best game behind him. Before I get to that question, let me just finish off the running backs here. Highest ownership range, we have Jerome Ford at 74%, Zeke Elliott 75%, Trey Benson 63%. Jerome Ford, I don't know how he's this available in leagues. Nobody listening to this podcast would have had him on the waiver wire. If he's on your waiver wire, he is up there probably in the same range as J.K. Dobbins. I'm willing to spend 40, 50%. I think Ford is at least a half a season here. I get Dobbins is probably a step above him because I think it could be season long, but Ford, I think, is the guy in Cleveland this year for at least half the season. Zeke, I'm not going crazy over. I think he's a boring flex play. If you need someone to just, plug in a spot start here and there are worse options than Zeke. And Trey Benson, I'm not going crazy over, but he is one of the high-end handcuffs. We already seen Jordan Mason hit the handcuff lottery, so I advocate adding Trey Benson here just in case he is the next handcuff lottery winner. So it is Anthony Richardson, Ford, and McBride for Hall, Braylon Allen, and Justice Hill. The Hall owner needed a QB. He lost Love. So the Hall owner. So we have Richardson, Ford, and McBride. I love Richardson, Ford, and McBride far better than the Hall. I see a top 5 quarterback, a top 3 tight end, and a solid RB2 for, assuming that's Breece Hall, for a top 2 or 3 RB and 2 guys I'm probably never going to play at running back. So I'm all over the Anthony Richardson side here, even in single QB. That one's confusing to me, I guess. The Hall owner needed a QB. I think he got the better side of the deal, actually. I get Breece Hall in that format, but I think McBride, unless he already has a tight end that he doesn't need, I get it's a huge downgrade from Hall to Ford, but I like the quarterback situation and I like McBride. I prefer, if you can afford to give up Hall there, I don't think Braylon Allen and Justice Hill factor into this equation at all. Hey, man, how's it going? Waiver order, Hill, Bigsby. Let's go see. Hill, Bigsby, Jeff Wilson. I think Bigsby's the best there. I don't have really much hope for Hill or Wilson. As I said, I had Dobbins way higher. Wide receivers, he has Dortch, McMillan, Pierce. I like McMillan a ton. I was on him all offseason. I don't mind Pierce. Dortch, I don't have much interest in. Rams, Johnson, I don't really have a whole lot of interest in him. He's all right. He might be a flex play with Puka out. QB, I am also on board with Justin Fields. The problem is, don't spend a lot on him. We don't have any idea how long he's in. I have Achane. Do I handcuff or make 2 moves? I handcuff Achane because I'm a Mostert guy. Wright also looked good, but it depends on what your pivots are there. Thoughts on the Rams tight end? Colby Parkinson looked all right. He could have more volume here with Puka Nacua out, so I don't mind him as a stash. One team PPR traded CJ Stroud and Singletary for Allen and Pittman. Is it fair, or will I have the Vito Vultures? So Allen is higher. Maybe you go from QB1 to QB4. Pittman is, I don't think this one's going to pass. The QBs, you're probably it's the Josh Allen side is getting the better QB. Theoretically, you never know with Stroud. He could blow up here. But that one's close. It's not immediately vetoable. But Pittman for Singletary, I don't think that one passes. I love it if I get the Allen Pittman side, but I don't think that one passes, especially in a 14-teamer. Okay, going to run back to the running backs here. As I said, my favorite option is J.K. Dobbins. I'm dropping a ton on him if I can get him. I also like Jerome Ford as my second best bet. I think he has J.K. Dobbins upside, except he may not have the job the whole season. He may have competition later in the season. And my number 3 would be Jordan Mason. I don't think he's available in many leagues now. I think by tomorrow morning he's going to be 99% owned. And for all we know, he could have just had his best game of the season. So, full PPR league with 3 flex spots. I have number 1 priority, need a running back. Running back is Ford and Javante. Ooh, that's gross. All top dogs are gone. Should I spend my waiver wire on or fab on Madison? I chip in a few bucks. Like if you're $100 budget, maybe $5, $5-6 here. I wouldn't go crazy anywhere else. If J.K. Dobbins is available, I assume you said he's not. If Dobbins is available, that's where I'm cashing all my money in. But I wouldn't go higher than maybe 5% of your budget on Alexander Madison. We don't know what this Raiders offense is going to look like. He looked like he had some potential, but I mean, Madison's never really been the starter. Even in Minnesota, he was better as the backup in a limited role. Excuse me. Next, we have the wide receivers. Waiver priority. Sorry, I read that wrong. You're spending your waiver priority on him. Madison is one where I think I'm going to pass on it. Don't bother wasting your waiver priority. Wait and see if he clears waivers, which is possible. If he clears waivers, add him for free off of the free agent wire. I wouldn't really burn a waiver wire priority for him here. It's just not worth it. What did he put up this week? He's not even on the list. Oh, there he is. 16, 17 fantasy points, no rushing yards. It came all in the passing game for the most part. I'm not burning my waiver wire priority on that. You're probably going to get similar production out of Javante, and I like Ford. So, moving on to the receivers. We had Alec Pierce, who had that long bomb touchdown, 1% rostered. The next two in the lower rostership category are interesting ones. They're kind of case specific. Kevontae Turpin, Cowboys, 0% rostered. This is one, if you're in a league that gives you're welcome. If it gives a heavy bonus or any kind of counting of return yards, he's pretty good with the new dynamic kickoff rules. So Kevontae Turpin is a guy to monitor here if you count kick return yards. Ray McLeod, go figure. He was the leading receiver for the Falcons. Kirk Cousins looked terrible. That offense looks terrible. This is a desperation one here. Ray McLeod is I'm putting in $1 bid on him. I don't think you'll ever actually be able to start him, but in the under 25% ownership range, it was ugly. If you need someone, Alec Pierce is likely the guy I'm going to go with here. He's going to have some boom or bust weeks. There's going to be some Ryan Fitzpatrick level YOLO ball from Anthony Richardson. Sometimes he's going to heave it up, and Pierce is going to score himself a 65-yard touchdown. Other weeks, it's going to get intercepted, and Pierce is going to have 2 catches for 20 yards. Pierce has some upside. I guess you could say the same of A.D. Mitchell in that offense and Josh Downs when he's healthy. There's a lot of mouths to feed there. It's inconsistent. Richardson's decision-making is not great. So it's going to be up and down, and you're never really going to know to start him. Alec Pierce is a great best ball target, though. I guess that's what best ball's made for. The 26 to 50% wide receiver range here is gross. We got Brandon Cooks at 32%, Jerry Jeudy at 45%, Gabe Davis at 37%. Cooks is the ugly one here, where we've seen that when another team is going to double team and just bracket cover CD Lamb all game, Dak has absolutely no reservations about just peppering the old guy. I don't expect Cooks to be anything more than an occasional flex play. But having said that, the Cowboys are going to look a lot better than they did this week because the Browns defense is legit. So if you're desperate, Cooks is not a terrible play if you want flex potential. The other 2 receivers in this group, I think were decent here. I think they both have wide receiver 3 potential. Jerry Jeudy, I get it. It's boring. It's a Cleveland Brown, but it was a tough matchup. Jeudy showed he can still play a little bit. He's not as bad as he looked last year. I think Jeudy is worth probably 5% of your budget here. I think he's not going to be the number 1 in front of Amari Cooper, but he could be a solid number 2. The other one here is Gabe Davis, who led the Jags in receiving in week 1. Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be the one everyone's chasing after. Christian Kirk, injured, healthy, who the hell knows? I think Gabe Davis is another case here like Alec Pierce. You're going to use 5% of your budget on him. in hopes that you have him in your lineup when he has that 4-touchdown blow-up week. He's going to be a solid wide receiver 3, I think, but it's just not a huge upside. And like it's volatile, so best ball again. The highest range here, 50 to 75%. We have Rashid Shaheed, 54%, Tyler Lockett, 61%, Ladd McConkey, 74%. Rashid Shaheed is the guy that probably none of your league mates know unless you're in like an industry league. The people in my home league had no idea who Rashid Shaheed is, my work league for the most part. So I got him everywhere in the last round. If this is especially true, if your league counts return yards, he was one of the elite returners last year. He's the obvious number 2 receiver on this Saints squad that looked a lot better last week. Could be because it's Carolina. He had a sneaky 700 receiving yards last year, and I like him to crack 1,000 this year and challenge for top 24 overall wide receiver production. Tyler Lockett, turns out he wasn't dead. I get he was probably the best of these 3 receivers in week 1. I'm spending the least on him. Lockett is going to be useful from time to time, but week 1 was a case where DK Metcalf was shadowed by Patrick Surtain, which I didn't think was going to happen, but it did. DK does not do well when shadowed by an elite defensive back, as we've seen. So Tyler Lockett got to step up. He was the producer. This is going to be one where Lockett's going to be volatile. If DK is going to go up against an elite corner, you start Lockett. If there isn't an elite corner or safety or whatever, a defensive back to shadow DK, you leave Lockett on the bench and assume it's a DK week. Ladd McConkey was probably the biggest riser of all the rookie receivers, which doesn't say much. Most of them weren't great. I don't mind this one. He's got some potential. I think I like Rashid Shaheed more than McConkey. I think the Saints offense is better, and I think he's the guaranteed 3. Having said that, McConkey could be the wide receiver 1 on the Chargers. He could be the 3. What we've seen in week 1 was that McConkey, Palmer, and Quentin Johnston all had, I think it was 5, 6, and 7 targets, something like that. They're all within 1 target of another there. I think that's how you're going to see it. It's going to be evenly distributed with a heavy dose of the run game because that's Jim Harbaugh's style. So Ladd McConkey was the highest producer this week because he scored the touchdown. If he doesn't score the touchdown, he's going to have the Palmer or QJ week where he's not really useful for you. So he's another one where if you're going to start him, you got to hope that he turns his 5, 6, or 7 targets into a touchdown, and it's not Josh Palmer or Quentin Johnston. Like I said, there's some interesting options here. Don't love any of the cheap options. Alec Pierce, I guess, is a dart throw if you can deal with inconsistent. Jerry Jeudy and Gabe Davis are boring and quiet, but I think are solid wide receiver or flex options if you want to pick up. They can probably be had cheap 5%. I like the high-end options here. Lockett, I like the least. Shaheed, I'm probably willing to spend 10 to 12% on. I like me some Shaheed here. Maybe it's a little Saints bias, but it is what it is. That's not, that's odd considering I was the Saints hater all offseason, but I do like some Shaheed. McConkey, I want to spend a little less on here. I get there's upside here, but until we see how this plays out, it looks to be a wide receiver by committee, and that's not great in this offense. Move on to the tight ends. There are far less options, so I only gave 2 in each bracket. 3 of the top 10 tight ends in week 1 played for the Saints. Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau, and Taysom Hill, and that's truly horrifying. The 0 to 25% ownership range, we have Juwan Johnson at 3%, Chigo Okonkwo at 10%. Juwan Johnson I was higher on towards the tail end of the offseason. It looked like he was going to be healthy. He is indeed healthy. He got into the end zone. He's a big body target. I like him. I think if you need a tight end, he has low-end tight end 1 appeal and is worth 5 to 10%, probably 5% conservatively. I don't think he's a big name anyone's going to chase after. And the exact same thing can be said of Chig Okonkwo. 5 probably gets him, 10% if you have to. He looked like, as bad as this Tennessee offense is, he looked like he could be the most reliable target on the team. Ridley wasn't great. Who do they have there? Hopkins dealing with a torn MCL or an MCL injury. Treylon Burks, Tyler Boyd. I get Will Levis sucks and was awful. But Chig still managed to put a top 10 finish. I know that's not much for tight end, but he reeled in a touchdown here. And I like both of these for cheap options. If you are desperate for tight end, you can get them both for, I would say, 5 to 10% at most. And they should be low-end tight end ones for much of the season. 26 to 50% here. We have two opposite players here. Hunter Henry at 32% is the boring one. He didn't do much in week one. He is the definition of touchdown dependent. He's going to get you 4 for 40 every week. He will be useless if he doesn't score. He will be serviceable in a pinch if he scores. He is your desperation in case of emergency break glass. The bell of the ball for tight end here is Isaiah Likely. I have had a conversation with a few people, and I'm simply not going to have any shares of him. He's going to go at insane costs like Jordan Mason did. And much like Jordan Mason, I think it's possible that the best game of Likely's season was Likely last week. If you look at it, Mark Andrews was double-teamed, bracket covered all freaking night long. They didn't run Derrick Henry much. Zay Flowers really struggled to get much going. I think the Ravens are able to pass more in the future. They're able to get Derrick Henry and Lamar involved more on the ground. And more importantly, other teams are going to realize that if you double cover Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely is just going to beat you, which means you're going to have one-on-one with Likely and one-on-one with Mark Andrews, and Mark Andrews is going to have the targets funneled back to him. So I think we did this 2 years ago. I mean, I know Andrews was out then. Likely had his best game. Everyone put 70% of their fab budget on him, and he didn't do anything after that. So I'm not going to have any Likely because he's just going to be too expensive. I think I'd actually rather have the cheaper options here of Chigo Okonkwo or Juwan Johnson. Dynasty's a little bit different. Likely has some talent, but this is for redraft. If you're in Dynasty, yep, Likely is worth stashing because he could take over and be awesome once Mark Andrews is gone. Same could be said for Noah Gray of the Chiefs once Kelsey's gone. Your highest end options here, there aren't many, but I have Taysom Hill at 57%, Pat Freiermuth at 74%. Freiermuth is going to be the second in targets on this Steelers offense. That looks kind of a mess. It's not a great high-end play. There's low-end tight end one potential here, though. I'm interested on pretty much any tight end who has the lockdown second target in his team job, and that's what Freiermuth looks like. So I will take a shot at him, probably 5%. Taysom Hill's one. I'm probably doing the same for him, 5%. We all know what Taysom Hill is. 1 week, he's going to put up 45 points. Then he's going to put up 3 points for the next 3 weeks. He's going to finish overall as a top 5 tight end, and it's all going to come in 3 to 4 weeks. So we know what Taysom Hill is. It's truly scary. So like I said, I guess we'll scroll through here. My number one tight end target that I'm going to target, because I think we'll call this cost adjusted, because I think Likely is going to be the one everyone's targeting. I'm going to look more at Chigo Okonkwo or Juwan Johnson, bang for my buck. At wide receiver, I believe everyone's going to be going for Lad McConkey, flashy new toy. I will be going for Rashid Shaheed if I want huge upside. And I'd also like to add in a Jerry Jeudy or Gabe Davis share pretty cheap. The running backs, everyone's going Jordan Mason. We all know that. His best game may be behind him. I don't mind Alex Madison cheap. Love J.K. Dobbins. He's probably my number one waiver target of the week. And Jerome Ford, if he's available, you got to have him too. Who was my third there? Oh, Jordan Mason. But he's, like I said, he's going to be owned by everyone tomorrow morning. Quarterbacks, it wasn't pretty. Obviously, if Purdy is available, if you're one of the 26% of leagues, go get Purdy. Other than that, Baker's probably the top option here. I don't really believe in any of the cheaper options. I'm going to be forced into some Darnold shares, maybe some Field shares. Carr, I have no faith in him continuing this. Geno Smith is a solid, boring, reliable option. Same with Matthew Stafford. And Justin Herbert, I don't mind taking a shot at here if you have the belief that he will turn this around. All right, everyone, that concludes the Week 2 waiver wire on the Fantasy Football Universe. If you want to check out the written article, head over to fantasyfootballuniverse.com, where we have this week's IDP article, waiver wire article, available as well. And we've got some other betting content and survivor pool stuff like that coming out later today. Thank you all for tuning in. Check back tomorrow where we will do It's Bills and Dolphins on Thursday night, so it will be AFC home game previews tomorrow, and Thursday will be NFC home game previews, both at noon. See you tomorrow. Take care, everyone.